Imagine being under the scorching sun, covered in dust, wearing heavy armor and going without a bath for days or even weeks. But forget everything epic movies have shown about immaculate soldiers with red capes and gleaming breastplates. The real life of Roman soldiers, especially during long marches and military campaigns, was far less heroic and much more stinky. Few people know it, but the legendary legionaries conquered half the world without ever getting close to a proper bath. Can you imagine the smell, the discomfort, and the hidden dangers behind all that filth? What you're about to discover might completely change your perception of the most powerful army of antiquity, because the real war happened inside the camp itself, on those endless roads of the empire. Every step raised clouds of dust that clung to the soldiers' sweaty skin, and there was never enough water to wash it all off. During military campaigns, Roman logistics were indeed impressive. They carried tents, food, weapons, even tools to build roads. But there was one precious resource that never seemed enough: water. And it wasn't just for drinking. Water was also needed for cooking, treating wounds, and watering the horses. So, when the legions advanced through arid regions or hostile territories, guess which need fell to the bottom of the list? That's right, bathing. Few people know that many Roman soldiers went days and, in some cases, even entire weeks without seeing a single bucket of water dedicated solely to hygiene. Sweat, dust, blood, food grease. All of it built up on their clothes, skin, and hair. Can you imagine the smell in a Roman camp after a 30 or 40-kilometer march under the sun? The result was a nightmare. Dried sweat mixed with dust, armor stuck to the skin, and the stench growing so strong it seemed to hang over the camp like a thick cloud. And it wasn't just a matter of disgust or discomfort, because for a Roman soldier, filth could mean the beginning of dangerous diseases, and that could decide the fate of an entire war. But the situation was even more critical in desert regions, like during campaigns in Syria or North Africa. In these areas, rivers and water sources were scarce and often controlled by the enemy, which meant that any attempt to wash up could cost dearly, even their lives. Another invisible enemy that made life difficult for Roman soldiers clung tightly to their bodies: their own clothing. Few people realize it, but Roman uniforms were not exactly lightweight or breathable garments. Much of the tunics worn by legionaries were made of wool or, in some cases, coarse linen, and although these were durable materials, they had one small problem. They absorbed sweat like a sponge and held onto odors as if they were precious treasure. When the sun beat down on the legions during their marches, the wool boiled against their skin, causing abrasions and chafing. Can you feel the agony just thinking about it? But that wasn't all. At night, the soldiers would set up camp, perform the bare minimum of hygiene, and the cold would make those same damp clothes chill them to the bone. Few could sleep peacefully knowing that the sweat from the previous day was still clinging to their bodies. It was common to see soldiers trying to wring out their tunics to squeeze out excess sweat, but it didn't help much. Many times they only managed to wash their faces or hands and tried to dry their tunics against their own bodies. After all, taking off their clothes to dry them in the open air could mean exposing themselves to the cold or a surprise attack. The result? The clothes dried only partially, but the smell of sweat, dust, grease, and even blood remained deeply ingrained. And the next day, it all started again. In hot regions like Syria, the situation grew even worse. The intense heat turned the tunics into personal ovens, while clouds of dust stuck to sweaty skin, creating a crust that felt like cement. Meanwhile, in the cold lands of Germania, the damp chill meant the clothes never fully dried. The result? Soldiers marching with extra kilos hanging from their bodies, pure moisture and filth. Yes, you heard that right. Soaked tunics could become so heavy that they added several kilograms to a legionary's burden. Still, as uncomfortable as the clothes were, they had to be kept on, because marching without them meant exposing oneself not only to brutal weather, but also to the vigilant eyes of officers and the severe punishments for even minor breaches of discipline. And even in the face of so much discomfort, the Roman army did not leave everything to chance. On the contrary, as impossible as maintaining hygiene might have seemed, there were clear orders and strict routines that every soldier was obliged to follow. The commanders knew that filth could become as dangerous an enemy as any opposing legion, So, even without being able to offer daily baths, the Romans instructed their soldiers to wash their faces, hands, and private parts whenever possible, even if it was just with a canteen of water. And when there were rivers or lakes nearby, the commander would allow small groups to bathe quickly. But strictness didn't appear only in personal hygiene. Inside the camps, there were strict rules for separating clean and dirty areas. Did you know that? Few people are aware of this detail, but it's something that shows just how meticulous the Romans were. The tents were very well organized, lined up in rows, and specific areas were designated for cooking, storing drinking water, and relieving oneself. Because yes, even waste was managed with military planning. This is where a little known but absolutely crucial figure comes in: the meditors. Have you ever heard of them? These men were responsible for planning where the army would set up camp. They studied the terrain, measured distances, and even decided where the latrines would be placed. And it wasn't just anywhere. The latrines were always located far from the tents, positioned downwind so that the smell wouldn't waft into the camp. And there were even rules for digging holes deep enough to prevent water contamination or the spread of disease. In addition, the meditors also had the delicate task of identifying sources of clean water. And here's a detail few would imagine. There were specific orders forbidding soldiers from washing utensils or clothes near sources of drinking water, all to protect the supply that often meant the difference between life and death for the troops. Because if the legion consumed contaminated water, the result could be catastrophic. Outbreaks of dysentery, fevers, and diseases that killed more soldiers than many battles. A historical example took place during the famous siege of Carthage in the 2nd century BC. The Roman legions kept the city blockaded for months, but while they were besieging the enemy walls, they were also trapped in a hot, humid region surrounded by stagnant water. And it was precisely that stagnant water that became the troops' worst nightmare. Mosquitoes multiplied, puddles turned into breeding grounds for bacteria, and soon diseases began to spread. Some modern historians suspect that malaria and outbreaks of dysentery decimated hundreds, perhaps thousands of legionaries during that siege, all because it was impossible to maintain hygiene in such a hostile environment. And that wasn't the only time. In several campaigns, especially in tropical or desert regions, the biggest challenge was defeating the invisible enemy that attacked from within. In the end, perhaps the greatest secret of Roman power is this: they conquered half the world, but they never managed to completely defeat the filth that marched alongside them. Now, I'd like to know your opinion. What did you find most interesting in this story? Do you think you'd be able to march for days without taking a bath? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you enjoyed the story and want to see more epic content like this, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. In the video that's now on your screen, we'll reveal the insane logistics of a Roman army on the march.